discovered China. Pictographs etched into tortoise shells and animal bones are called the oracle bone scripts. What mystery was engraved in the oracle bone scripts? What special honors were buried in Fu Hao's tomb? Walk into the Yin ruins with Discover China, and we will find the legend of Yin Shang come alive. In 1899, the Chancellor of Beijing Imperial Academy, Wang Yirong, was suffering from malaria. Someone was sent to a Chinese herbal medicine pharmacy named Da Ren Tang to fill the prescription. Wang Yirong was a very cautious man. As usual, would examine the ingredients of each medicine brought to him. Upon inspection, he discovered something unusual. One ingredient of the medicine was called dragon bones. Dragon bones were actually pieces of tortoise shells or animal bones and are a common ingredient in traditional Chinese medicine. Wang noticed that the dragon bones were marked with some strange patterns and symbols. Even more extraordinary was that these patterns were not made by nature, but were engraved by someone. Wang Yirong, a famous epigrapher himself, soon realized the historic significance of these symbols. From that moment on, Wang Yirong spent every penny he earned in search of more dragon bones. As he continued to study the strange markings and scripts, it wasn't until years later Chinese scholars confirmed Wang Yirong's discoveries were some of ancient China's oldest characters, believed to have derived from the Shang Dynasty, over 3,000 years old. The discovery of the oracle bone scripts pushed back the start of China's history of using written characters to 500 years earlier. The term oracle bone script originated from the Shang Dynasty when carvings were made into tortoise shells and cattle bones. Yet these bone scripts were not the books or literature of the time, but divine records or archives of the Shang Dynasty. A priest was thought to be able to see the future by burning cattle bones. Afterwards, he recorded or etched those visions on shell and bones. In 1936, in the ancestral temple zone of the Yin ruins, an archaeological team discovered a huge cache of bone script. This was the largest unearthing of ancient oracle bone scripts in the history of the Yin ruins excavation. Inside of the famous H127 pit, in the space of less than half a cubic meter, 17,096 pieces of tortoise shells were uncovered, and as many as 300 of them were found intact. Gun became the 23rd king of the Shang Dynasty and was a successful Shang emperor. For more than 10,000 pieces of bone script were unearthed from Pit H127, all from the era of Wu Ding's reign. The rich content of the scripts covered topics such as politics, military affairs, agriculture, and astronomy, as well as calendars, birthdays, diseases, hunting, paying tribute, and divinations. This information provided the most valuable clues for understanding this time in history. On every piece of bone or shell oracle records were not always completed. These fragments brought surprise and joy, but at the same time, inexplicable puzzles and regrets. One of the oracle inscriptions reads, Peng Fu Hao drafted therein, which means, before war, Fu Hao had recruited soldiers in a place called Peng. Another inscription read, Divination. Fu Hao enrolled 3,000 into a troop of 10,000. This means Fu Hao's 3,000 soldiers joined the king's army of 10,000 for the invasion of distant tribes. This was the greatest war recorded on the oracle bone scripts. As compared to modern armies, a force of 13,000 may not seem so mighty. Proportionally, at that time, 13,000 soldiers would have meant withdrawing 1/10 of the capital city's population, suggesting the scale of this war was significant. Therefore, it is concluded that Fu Hao, the commanding general of the war, must have been a very influential military officer. In 1976, an archaeological team by chance found Fu Hao's tomb. The tomb was 5.6 meters long from north to south, 4 meters wide from east to west, and 7.5 meters deep. The entire tomb was well preserved, but because of flooding, Fu Hao's coffin had completely decayed. This might be the reason grave robbers failed to find any remains. The unearthed funerary objects gave people the idea for the first time of how luxurious the royal tombs of the Shang Dynasty could be. A total of 1,928 pieces of bronze, jade, bone objects, and stonewares were among those products of the time. Additionally, more than 6,800 pieces of shells from the South China Sea were also found in the tomb. It's believed these shells were used as the currency of the Shang Dynasty and a symbol of wealth. The tomahawk, a kind of battle axe from the Shang Dynasty period, was more a symbol of power than simply a sign of military command. On a bronze axe weighing 8 kilograms, found there is a clear cast of the words Fu Hao. This confirmed what had been recorded in both historical records and the oracle bone scripts that Fu Hao was indeed a powerful military general. Fu Hao's is the only tomb of the Shang Dynasty royalty that has evidence between the messages on the oracle bones directly corresponding with the tomb's age and owner's identity. Most kings of the Shang Dynasty were buried in the royal tomb area of the Yin ruins, where 12 large tombs have been found. Among the 12, 8 tombs have 4 passageways, 3 have 2 passageways. The last tomb was large but incomplete. It's easy to see from its size that 4 passageways could have been built there. Archaeologists speculated that it might be the tomb for King Zhou, the last king of the Shang Dynasty. Before King Zhou's tomb was complete, he had burned himself to death at a place called Lu Tai during the successful invasion of King Wu, which successfully ended over 550 years of the Shang Dynasty reign. The royal tomb area of the Shang Dynasty is the home of the catacombs of Chinese emperors, and it is China's oldest and most complete group of ancient tombs. Over the next 3,000 years, many graves were robbed. Because very few clues were ever left, it remains a mystery event to this day about which emperor was buried in which tomb. Comparing Fu Hao's tomb to the largest tombs with passageways, the larger tombs are thought to have been more grand, so the funerary objects in them most likely would have been even more lavish. Today, it still remains a mystery. Because the tombs are all empty, researchers had to scrutinize the oracle bone scripts for clues. As a result, they found something even more startling. General Fu Hao turned out to be a woman and would be bearing the king's child. According to the bone scripts, King Wu Ding was very concerned about the forthcoming baby and was eager to know its gender. The startling discovery revealed General Fu Hao was Wu Ding's queen. 3,000 years ago, the Shang Dynasty was a society in which men were considered superior over women. A noble queen, as well as an honored lady general. How could this be true? Such a story coming from an ancient and mystic China shattered the belief that women were in the shadow of men. Yin ruins lie on both banks of the Huan River, with the Grand Royal Tomb situated mostly on the north bank. And the palaces and ancestral temples on the south bank, where local people worked and lived. However, Fu Hao, with both her prominent status and military achievements, was not buried in the royal tomb area. Instead, her tomb was built in the palace area. Was Fu Hao's tomb rejected as royal or privileged by the king? There are all kinds of speculation. The most favorable explanation is that Fu Hao died before King Wuding. Wuding missed her so much that he buried her in the vicinity of his palace harem, seeing her whenever he desired. In 1939, in the royal tomb area, the villagers of Wuguang dug out an enormous square bronze cauldron. This is the largest bronze object so far believed to have been unearthed in China. Its name is the Simu Wu Grand Cauldron. It is a funerary object from a large-scale tomb, which is only second in scale to the king's. From the shape and inscriptions on the cauldron, experts believe that the tomb's owner was a queen called Wu, another wife of King Wuding. While both Wu and Fu Hao were the queens of King Wuding, Wu's tomb was much bigger than Fu Hao's. Additionally, the weight of the cauldron was about 5 times greater than Fu Hao's tomb cauldron, called Simu Shin. This shows Wu's status in the royal family should have been much higher than Fu Hao's, and yet, in records from the Oracle Bone Scrolls, there were very few words about Fu Wu. What could be the reason such a noble queen should be forgotten? Major events such as warfare and resulting sacrifices of the nation were the foundations upon which the Shang Dynasty was built. King Wuding spent 3 years conquering neighboring countries and tribes to expand his territory and power. In turn, this facilitated the economic and cultural exchange between the Shang Dynasty in the Central Plains and neighboring tribes. The Shang Dynasty became a magnificent empire. Its vast land stretched from Gansu in the from the Great Desert in the north over the Jianghan River Basin in the south. Although Fu Hao's status was lower than Queen Wu's, she was held in higher esteem than Wu in the royal family. The oracle bones lead us to believe General Fu Hao made remarkable contributions towards expanding the Shang Empire. The oracle bone scripts mainly recorded stories of sacrifices and war. Fu Hao, who was often on the battlefield, should surely appear in the records more frequently than Wu, who stayed behind in the royal palace. For instance, the question, "Is Fu Hao married?" appears repeatedly in the oracle records, meaning to ask if Fu Hao had got remarried after her death. It's answered in the records. Fu Hao had been remarried to 3 different kings. Fu Hao had married 3 kings after her death. How strange this custom. In fact, the 3 kings she married were King Wu Ding's ancestors who had passed away a long time ago. People of the Shang Dynasty believed that after death, life was no different from this world. Fu Hao marrying the departed former kings was in accordance with Fu Hao's status and honor. The name Fu Hao has an official explanation. People understand her name to mean perfect woman. However, it is actually an incorrect literal interpretation. The ancient Shang Dynasty was steeped with myths and legends. Some of the ancient texts reflecting this marvelous civilization and several generations of legendary people and tales. Yet, under the earth, we are left with more questions and mystery to which there is no end.